Hello and welcome, Warhammer fans, to my first 40k video on this channel. As I'm making this, it's Orktober, and since the Orcs are my favorite faction of 40k other than a few key Space Marine chapters, I thought I'd start with them to celebrate Orktober, this most auspicious of months. God, I love the Orcs. They're just so... 40k is so heavy in the detail. Orcs are considered the universe's comic relief, and even these guys can be brutally dark and complicated. One thing I do love about 40k is that all of the factions have their strengths and weaknesses, and the Imperium of Man, who is usually the point of view faction, is slightly more powerful than the others, at least currently. By a hair's breadth even, it's not even by much. It's only really strong enough to keep all of the enemies at bay. If you ask most fans which faction was the deadliest, or the strongest in general, or the biggest threat to humanity, let's say, many would say the Tyranids, probably. The endless swarm of extragalactic insect, reptilian monsters that feed on entire planet ecosystems and are controlled by a vast hive mind that adapt to any situation. Some might say the Necrons, the souls of a dead race inhabiting bodies of living metal, former worshippers of star-eating gods that wield weapons that pick apart anything they hit at the molecular level, rising once more to claim their dominion of the galaxy. Some would then say chaos, the dark reflection of the material universe, and the endless hordes of what is essentially hell that attacks the galaxy through a 10,000 light-year wide hole ripped into real space by the screams of a birthed god. However, it's my contention that the most dangerous faction out there is the faction that most fans don't really take seriously, the Orcs. And in my opinion, if their race even became half unified, they would probably control most of the galaxy. I'll explain through the course of this video, so hope you enjoy. Now, this video is going to be mostly about the Orc subgroup of the Orkoid species, though there are various members of the Orkoid race. First, there are the Squigs, and there are various types of Squigs, but they're the beast type of Orkoid, usually a big body with a mouth full of teeth that's nearly as large as its body, hopping around on two legs. Some of them are really huge and vast and like on four legs, and those are called the Squiggoths, which are essentially monsters twice as tall and almost as tough as tanks that carry orcs into battle. Though most Squigs are not like that. Like all Orkoids, they are very aggressive and always hungry. Next are the Snotlings, the little miniature gremlin-like creatures that pretty much serve as fodder and food for the bigger Orkoids. After that are the Gretchen, which are the sci-fi 40k equivalent to the Warhammer Fantasy Goblin. They're pretty much bigger and smarter Snotlings, with green skin, long noses and ears, rat-like teeth and little claws on long fingers, and they're very cunning and mischievous and vicious. If they're lucky, they can pilot some of the Orcish war machines, or be small taskmasters for other Gretchen or Snotlings, or Squigs, but almost all of the time they are subservient in Orcish society. And after them, there are the Orcs themselves. They are at the top of the society. The Orcs vary in size greatly, and the reason for that is that they have an adrenaline-based metabolism. What that essentially means is, the more an Orc fights, the bigger he grows, particularly if he wins the fights. Eventually, they'll only grow if they win, or at least if they lose, and they'll grow in such a small amount of measurement that it wouldn't even really matter. Something else to note is that the bigger an orc gets, the smarter it gets too. Most orcs, I would say, are at around 7 to 8 feet tall and nearly 4 to 5 feet wide at the shoulder. Orcs are generally huge, and normal ones can match a Space Marine in strength, or at least close to it. Now, to give you some idea of that, in one of the Ultramarine novels by Graham McNeil, and these are the novels that are... Yeah, Matt Ward had nothing to do with them, so you don't need to worry. A man once tried to escape the clutches of a Space Marine sergeant by driving away in that planet's equivalent of a limousine, and the Ultramarine sergeant stopped him by picking the vehicle straight up off the ground with the wheels still spinning. Now, it wasn't weightless to the Astartes, but it was like holding a grocery bag at arm's length, and an Orc can usually match a Space Marine pound for pound in strength. They're immensely powerful creatures. The only things in the Imperium that can fight them hand-to-hand other than the Astartes are the Ogrins, which are the subhuman, or I wouldn't say subhuman, demi-human mutants of humankind that grew up on planets that had higher gravity than Earth, and they're really big and incredibly strong and durable. They're like the 40k equivalent of fantasy ogres. Ork bones are also intensely thick and durable, and not only that, but they are also able to take more stress than even their durability allows, meaning their bones have the ability to bend further than a human bones before they break, comparatively. Meaning if something falls on them that somehow they are not strong enough to hold, and that even their very durable bones cannot handle rigidly, they have a bending point where it's unlikely their bones will break unless it's an extremely special circumstance. Their bones are almost even more impressive in strength than their musculature. As you've probably guessed, their skulls are also really thick. In fact, they almost make up their entire head, protecting a relatively small brain. That's not to say, well, an orc isn't... Well, okay, yeah, the orcs are sometimes stupid, but they can show a surprising amount of cunning. But we'll get to that later. Their skin, like the Gretchen, is usually green, and their hides are very thick. In fact, the first power armor worn by the Space Marines were supposed to be as durable as orc hide, so that tells you something. But let's say that doesn't matter. Let's say you're a lucky guardsman and you have a shotgun and manage to blow a hole right through the orc's chest or stomach from 7 meters away with a few shells. Chances are the orc you're shooting at won't die, and if he does, it will take him a while. That is because orcs lack most vital organs that we humans need to survive. They have a brain, and they have a stomach, and you might argue they have some form of lungs, though it's unknown if they really need oxygen to survive. They probably don't. The point is, if you shoot them in the body and it manages to penetrate their thick hides and bones, you probably won't hit something that is really vital to them. This is actually why Space Marine bolters are designed to punch through armor and then explode within an enemy, because initially they were made with the purpose of fighting orcs in mind. I won't go into too much detail, but a bolter is the iconic gun of the Space Marine, and it's basically a cross between a battle rifle and a grenade launcher, firing huge 65 to 75 millimeter rounds, which are nearly twice the size of normal grenade rounds and launchers in the 21st century, just to give you an idea. They're made to pierce armor and explode as soon as they pierce, and not only is that good at killing men and being used for light anti-tank weaponry, but a bolter exploding within an orc ensures that an orc is at least fairly injured as long as it's a solid hit. You might ask why an orc doesn't need things like lungs or a heart or a liver to survive, and the reason for that is quite simple. These aliens are not pure terrestrial creatures, and by terrestrial I don't mean creatures of Earth, I mean like creatures that are normally what you would find on a natural planet. They're actually a hybrid between a creature and a fungus. Now, it's hard to tell if they're literally a fused version of creature and fungus, or if they have fungus within them that has a symbiotic relationship with them. Either way, it gives them exceptional abilities. While the orc gives the fungus that's either a part of them or within their bodies nourishment, the fungus shares its nourishment with the creature or beast part of the orc xenos. It's a very weird thing, and it explains a lot too. You know, orcs do require water and food to live, but they can go for a very, very long time without either, and they aren't really picky. They'll sometimes eat rocks, and they have a mild photosynthesis, so a planet's sun could power an orc in some fashion. So they hardly ever want for resources. The only other resource they need is combat, because it's almost like food to them. Orcs are also asexual creatures. They have male traits, but they really have no sex. The way they reproduce is through spores. As an orc moves and fights, and particularly when the orc dies, he releases microscopic spores that are about as tough as the orc. And if the conditions are right, which they usually are, they will eventually take root and grow into more orcs. This is why when orcs invade a planet, you can pretty much never get rid of them, even if you slaughter all of the orcs. Cities and towns of the Imperium have been attacked by savage orcs seemingly out of nowhere decades after an orc invasion because the orc spores had grown up into full orcs and made clans by then. Or tribes is more accurate. You can see why that could be a huge problem for the Imperium. If you're a guardsman and you're alone with an orc about 30 meters away from you, your best bet to survive that encounter is to turn your lasgun on full auto or power it up with charged shots and take out its legs to hit it in the thinner parts or the waist or chest to at least damage it enough to halt it. Though of course it's likely to still keep running at you and roar. Best case scenario is to shoot it in the eye with a charged shot so it'll travel straight up into its brain, though that is highly unlikely. If an orc makes it to you in melee range, you're pretty much dead unless you're an extremely lucky or skilled soldier. If you're really lucky, you have a shotgun, and if the orc grabs you, right before it bites your face off, you shove that shotgun into its mouth and pull the trigger. And if that kills the orc and you survive the orc's death spasms, which might still snap some of your bones, then maybe you'll be able to get a medevac out of there. As I said before, an orc in close range is only really matched by a space marine or maybe a Tyranid warrior organism, or maybe an Eldar banshee as long as the orc doesn't get its hands on the banshee. Because Eldar are very, very lithe and not very durable. Going back to orcish intelligence and physiology, fittingly enough, the orc brain is also connected to their metabolism. By that I mean, the more an orc fights and wins, the bigger he gets. But the more an orc fights and wins, he also gets smarter. Which is why orc war bosses are the biggest orcs about virtually every time, because not only does their size mean they are the best fighters, but that they have the most developed brain. However, you do need to understand that some orcs are born smarter than others, mostly because they might have been born with more of their genetic memory in the orcoid species, more on that later. But either way, or it could just be IQs like humans have. You know, some of us are born with better IQs than others. But what I mean by that is being bigger does not guarantee they're smarter. It only guarantees they have more intelligence upgrades, if we use video game terminology. Like, for example, if you have an orc that has won fights 10 times and there's an orc that's won 5 fights, then the orc that's won 10 fights will, have 5 more upgrades of his brain than the other one. Even if the one that has won 5 fights perhaps might have started out smarter. So pretty much, though yeah, generally the bigger an orc is, the smarter he is. Now, you might be thinking an incredibly, almost cartoonishly durable species with a hierarchy and physiology based on combat, on an incredibly dangerous race that multiplies rapidly with spore reproduction so you can never truly get rid of them. This doesn't sound like a race created by natural evolution. And you'd be right. The orcs did not evolve, they were bioengineered. 60 million years ago, the galaxy was not inhabited by nearly as many sentient species as there are in the 41st millennium, or at least they weren't as important or powerful in the grand scheme of things. At the time, there were only 3 races of note that we know of. There were the Old Ones, a highly advanced, near-immortal reptilian species that valued all life, considering it sacred. They were so highly advanced that they were probably the most advanced species to ever exist in 40k. There was also the Necrontyr, another advanced race that was unfortunate to have been born on a planet with a dying star that made it a very radioactive place to live. So while their technology was impressive and they began to explore other planets, they were still short-lived and were jealous of the Old Ones. Of course, it was more complicated than that with various politics, but the 2 races, the Old Ones and the Necrontyr, eventually began to war with one another. After various battles, the Old Ones began to have an upper hand in almost every engagement, until the Necrontyr discovered the 3rd race, a race that the Old Ones had fought before. They were called the Catan, or the Catan, and they are hard to explain. They weren't a regular race as far as we're used to. They were energy beings, vast as planets, and they fed on stars. They began to feed on the original Necrontyr star, and eventually somehow the Necrontyr managed to communicate with them and make metal bodies, so the Catan could inhabit them, and they made a pact with the Catan that if they would team up and conquer the galaxy and defeat the Old Ones, then the Catan would give the Necrontyr new bodies to make them immortal. They did. However, they tricked the Necrontyr and enslaved them in the metal bodies, making the Necrons of the 41st millennium. Of course, the Necrons eventually escaped their clutches, but at the time the Catan and the Necrons began to win against the Old Ones. The Old Ones then created their own races to fight the advancing Necrons at Catan. 2 of the races are ones that we know of today, that were bioengineered and created to fight this war. One of them was the Eldar, a very psychically gifted race and the heirs of the Old Ones' civilization. And the other race that the Old Ones created was the Krork, which were the precursors of the Ork that live in the 41st millennium. So the Orks were literally bioengineered to fight in a galactic-spanning war to be the soldiers that would challenge star gods and their immensely powerful machine armies. To be honest, I haven't even mentioned the most dangerous aspect about the Orks. what Ork Lore video would this be if I didn't include the wa? And it would be misspelled if there weren't at least 3 A's in the wa, and I believe they get the term from war, just using a Cockney accent. Now, wa means 3 different things in Orc society. The first is a battle cry. Orcs love screaming, and I'll do an example now. Whoa! The reason why it's used as a battle cry is for its second and far more important meaning. A wa in Orc society is when an Orc war boss has united various tribes, and we'll talk about tribes and clans later, and controls at least a planet, if not more, and then embarks on a massive migration of butchery. It's essentially 1 part crusade, 1 part barroom brawl. So if you ever hear an Orc wa is coming, then that will be at least a few million orcs under the leadership of a fairly powerful war boss. However, there is also an important third meaning, which is the wa energy, in reference to the inherent psychic energy of the Orc race. Whether by design of the Old Ones or by accident, every Orc is a psyker, most of them subconsciously. Only the strongest of them are aware of it. Now, what does this mean? You see, I won't go into too much detail on the way chaos energy works, or warp energy, or psychic energy, but essentially, emotions and actions echo in the warp. And if you are a psyker in the materium, you can make things change how you see fit from energy in the immaterium. So let's say 10 people are standing there looking at a tree, and they each believe the tree can move. The tree will not move, though there will be a very small echo in the warp of a moving tree. Well, put 10 million people in front of the tree, and they all can believe it can move. It still probably won't move, but there will be a moving tree demon, for lack of a better term, in the warp. And it is possible that it could possess that tree. Now, maybe there's a billion humans in front of this tree thinking it can move. The tree might start moving on its own accord because it is suddenly possessed by that demon. The chaos energy is just so pervasive at that time of all these people believing that this tree can move that the demon might incidentally be summoned and would start moving that tree with psychic energy or warp energy. And if there's a human psyker, as in a human who is naturally gifted with such energy, then it could make the tree move just by thinking it, if he is sufficiently powerful enough. Orcs, however, are all psykers. Most of them are somewhat weak psykers, and it's not like every orc can be like, I feel like a cheeseburger, and a cheeseburger pops up. But the more orcs there are in a certain area, the more wa energy, which is the orc natural psychic energy, there is. It's the psychic field they generate. This energy can do a lot of things. It makes belief real, most of the time. And it also makes the orcs more intelligent as well, as if it unlocks more of their genetic memory. So how does this affect orc society? Let's say you have 10 orcs on a planet. Unless there is a real orc psyker, and yes, I said all orcs are psykers, but this one is strong enough to do it at will. And they're called weird boys, by the way, the orc psykers. Unless there is an orc weird boy, these orcs will be extremely primitive. They won't know how to make weapons, they'll not even have the wheel. They'll be little more than apes, really. They might use bones as clubs, and that's about it. Now let's say you have a planet with 10 million orcs. These orcs will not only have their own language, but they will all have been born with rudimentary skills needed to combat enemies. And their wa field will be far stronger. Some of them, labeled as mech boys, will have an instinctual ability to create and fix machines. There will also be orcs called pain boys, which have a basic understanding of medical treatments. More on that later. They'll pretty much be more advanced. But there's also more. They will also make belief a reality. Now, what do I mean by that? And this will be a very cartoony explanation, but there have been many, many accounts of Imperial Guardsmen fighting orcs, and then picking up what the orc was using for a pistol, and opening it up to reveal that it is just a scrap box with bits of metal in it, with something resembling a grip and a barrel. And that's it. There's no mechanism inside or nothing to actually make it a gun. It's literally just a box with scraps in it. With no engineering, with an item that shouldn't be able to fire bullets, much less kill that guardsman's friends. Yet a moment ago, it was doing just that. As long as there's enough orcs in one place, and as long as the psychic field is strong enough, the wa energy field, it will allow things like this to happen. Another example. All orcs believe that painting something the color red makes it faster, and painting something yellow makes it give a bigger explosion. If 10 million orcs are together, then red trucks will go faster, and yellow bombs will blow up far more destructively than other bombs. So if you have 10 million orcs, your orc mechs might know how to make starships with basic construction, because they will be more intelligent because more orcs will be in the same place. However, with such low numbers, even as 10 million, the mech wouldn't be able to make a perfect starship, because, the orcs, it might have an instinctual way to build the machine, but that doesn't mean that it will be just as good as, say, a human that's been doing it for 50 years. Yet, because of the psychic energy field, the skill and the raw energy will meet in the middle. The orc's belief that the mech orc knows what it is doing, which it does to a point, will mean that the ship that it's making will fly. Even if the orc mech makes 18 mistakes that shouldn't allow the machine to fly, it will still fly. It will fly even if it's shaped in a way that is completely unaerodynamic. Now that you have some understanding of just how cartoony orcs can be, let's step back to their physiology again, because I'm going to take it a step further. Let's say that an orc and a space marine are squaring off in melee combat, and a space marine chops the orc's arm off with his chainsword. If the orc survives that battle, he'll wander his green ass over to the Pain Boy medical tent. If he still has his dismembered green arm, the Pain Boy can reattach that orc's arm. All he'll need to do is to nail it onto his socket, or even staple it, and within a few hours, that orc will have his arm back and it will be literally as good as new. Thanks to the fungus part of him. Because it could easily just fuse back onto him. Now let's take it a step further. If the orc wants to, or if the orc can't get back the arm that was cut off, he can simply go to the local mech boy, give him some teeth, because orc currency is literally orc teeth, and buy a mecha arm, and then either have him or the Pain Boy attach it to his arm socket, and then he now has a robot arm instead of his normal one. Hell, some orcs just choose to cut off their arms or their lower jaws or their legs so they can replace them with mechanical arms, jaws, or wheels for legs, though the legs one doesn't work as well sometimes. Or they replace arms with giant guns and the like. An orc can even survive decapitation sometimes. I mean, it's a big sometimes, but it has happened before, and as long as the orc head is relatively undamaged and is stapled or nailed back onto its body very, very soon, the orc has a good chance of living. Now, the last thing we'll talk about is the structure of orc society. Don't worry, it's a very short topic. As you know, the more an orc fights, and particularly if he wins, the stronger and more intelligent he grows and the better position he has in orc society. That's it. No, I'm just kidding. There are also tribes and clans, and they are different in orc society. A tribe is a group of orcs, ranging from 3 orcs to upwards of 1 million. It depends. They are each led by a war boss. A clan, on the other hand, is a loose collection of various types of orcs. Now, many tribes will usually have orcs that are mostly in the same clan, but it doesn't need to be. A tribe can often have orcs from many clans. Now, it's theorized there are more clans than the Imperium knows of, but I'll list the ones we know of at the moment and explain what they do. There's the Bad Moons, who grow the most teeth and therefore are the richest orcs, and can be considered the most merchant-like, though that's not saying much. If you have a lot of Bad Moons in your tribe, you're likely rich. There's the Goths, who are the biggest and best hand-to-hand combat orcs, and that is saying a lot. There's the Evil Sons, and they have the most mechs and fastest vehicles. There's the Death Skulls, who are the greediest orcs and take anything that isn't nailed down, and if it's nailed down, they'll just rip it off and take it anyway. They even sometimes loot in the middle of a firefight. There's the Snakebites, which are the most primitive orcs, who don't use any guns or vehicles or even the crude orc armor, but they are good fighters and usually are the Beastmasters. Then there is the Blood Axes, which is my favorite because of the color scheme, who are the most cunning orcs because they actually bother with flanking maneuvers and camouflage, and will actually retreat if death seems certain. And while many orcs think of them as cowards, they're good at strategies and commando roles. Oh, and I nearly forgot. The orcs have 2 gods that they worship, Gork and Mork. The difference between them is subtle, and some people think they're just the same god. The orcs claim that Gork is the god of cunning brutality, and Mork is the god of brutal cunning. The core difference between them is that Mork will hit you when you aren't looking, and Gork will hit you harder when you are. It's an odd religion, and some sources claim that one reason the orcs are so fearless is that their gods swallow them up in death and spit them back out to fight again as new orcs, so it's sort of a reincarnation kind of thing, but I'm not entirely certain if that is canon at the moment or not. Alright then, that wasn't too long of a video. There's a few more little things I could touch upon, and if you want to hear more, leave a comment in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Likes, subscriptions, and comments always help the channel. Happy October!